Good morning. Well, I've been told this Friday is Valentine's Day, all right? So I'm going to talk about love today, but I'm going to deal with Valentine's Day right up front and to help some of you out, especially you guys here, just to give you some information, all right? You've been wondering how much you should spend on Valentine's Day. Well, there's a survey done or projection that said that those participating in Valentine's Day, those buying gifts, will spend about $196.31 this year. So I know you've been wanting to spend more, but good news, you can go below what you had in mind, all right? Some of those guys out there, I think, why in the world did you bring that up, right? In all, it's estimated that $27.4 billion will be spent on Valentine's Day this year. And that's up from last year, all right? So some of you are thinking about buying a gift. Guys, I'm here to help you out. According to a survey, I don't know who they surveyed, but these are the 5 least desirable gifts to give. All right, here they are. Number 1, tools. Number 2, gym memberships. Number 3, sporting equipment. Number 4, cheesy stuffed animals. Or number 5, mixed tapes, which I'm not sure what that is. But I don't know about the survey. Personally, nothing says I love you more than a power tool or a rod and reel, you know? I just don't get it. Well, maybe you're the romantic type and you want to share some poetry. I'm not very good at memorizing poems, but here's one that I learned that I've never forgotten. Roses are red, violets are blue, God made me pretty, what happened to you? But that may be one you don't want to use, all right, on Valentine's Day. So thanks. That's all I'm going to do to help you out. You guys are on your own from here on out. So, but I do want to talk about love today. And last week we started this phase in our sermon series about the ways of Jesus, the way Jesus did things. We looked at the way Jesus saw the world and saw that he would see the world through a heavenly perspective, and that we need also to see things around us through the eyes of Jesus and see them as Jesus saw them. Well, today I want us to learn about love and to be able to love the way Jesus loved. And it's not an idea I came up with my own that we should do, because Jesus said this in John 13. He says, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another." It's a command of Jesus. He says, you're to love others the way I love others. And then the question to me, all right, then I need to know how Jesus loved. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at some of the stories in the New Testament, just a few of them. There are a lot more than I'll share today, and about how Jesus reacted to people, how he loved people. And the word love is not always used, but it's the actions that he did. You can see that he had compassion, had a heart for other people. And usually when I go through stories like that, I make some life application points as we're going through. And today, I'm not going to do that. We're going to do some stuff at the end. But I want you to intentionally just dwell on what Jesus did. And think about what he did and how he loved. So, first I want us to look at Jesus loved others that everyone else seemed to avoid. He loved the people everyone else avoided. There was this group of people called lepers in those days. And they referred to several times in the New Testament. And in Mark chapter 1, we have an incident. And in Matthew 26, we have these. Just listen here. It says, a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him and he was cured. And then just a little reference in Matthew 26, verse 26, it says, and while Jesus was in Bethany in the home of a man known as Simon the leper. What happened there? He shared a meal. What's the big deal? The big deal is lepers were those that everyone else avoided. Leprosy in the biblical days as well as today is still a dreaded disease. The term in the Bible, in the Old Testament, could refer to anybody that had a skin disease or had boils on them or scabs or eczema or anything that was readily seen. And that developed more widespread, and by the New Testament era, somewhat like we have today in leprosy. But in those days especially, you were to avoid anybody that had leprosy. You were not to even touch them. You were not to be near them. You talk about people that people avoided, that was them. A Jew would see someone in the leper coming down the road, they'd cross across the road and go across the other side. Why was it such a big deal? Well, for two reasons. First, leprosy was considered a curse by God. They felt if there was somebody that was a leper, then they must have done something wrong. They must have received a curse from God, and you did not want to associate with anyone who was cursed by God. And secondly, just the disease itself was a terrible disease. It was thought to be just a skin disease, but they found out now that it's a neurological disease. And I found this description. I'm just going to read it because I'd never heard it really described this way. Talking of leprosy, it says its symptoms start in the skin and peripheral nervous system outside the brain and spinal cord, and then spreads to the other parts. And then listen to these descriptions, such as the hands, feet, face, earlobes. Patients with leprosy experience disfigurement of the skin and the bones, twisting of the limbs, curling of the fingers to form the characteristic claw hand. Facial changes include thickening of the outer ear and the collapsing of the nose. Tumor-like growths called lipomas may form on the skin and in the respiratory tract, and the optic nerve, which helps you see, may deteriorate. The largest number of deformities develop from a loss of pain sensation due to the extensive nerve damage. And what that means is someone would get cut with leprosy and it would get infected and they would never even know it. Why? Because there's no pain. There's nothing saying, this is in trouble spot on your body here. And those would turn into infections. And many times gangrene can set in and those parts get amputated or just rot away. So it was not a pleasant deal, all right? And it's not something anybody wanted, and they also know that leprosy can be transmitted simply by touching through bodily fluids and things like that. So in those days, the Pharisees and the Jewish culture, they had a disdain towards anybody who had leprosy, a fear of them, because they were cursed by God and because it was a terrible disease. And what did Jesus do? He walked up to the man and he did the unthinkable. He reached out and he touched him. And I'm sure that brought a gasp from the crowd. And then because of his divine power, he healed the man of leprosy. That's how Jesus loved. He loved the people that everyone else avoided. In another instance, he loved the people. He loved the people that no one else wanted to be with at all. He loved the people that were demon-possessed. There's a story in Mark chapter 5. They're getting off the boat. Jesus and his disciples are getting off the boat. They crossed the Sea of Galilee to the east side of the lake there. Pick it up in Mark chapter 5, verse 1. It says, they went across the lake to the region of Gerasenes. And when Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. Now what does that that phrase, no one could bind him anymore, what does that imply? It implies that they've been doing it, that they've tried it. The only way they could handle this guy is to chain him up, to tie him up, and put him away probably in some room somewhere. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on the feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. Not the type of guy you hope your daughter brings home for a visit. And evidently he had been cast out, living in the tombs and the hills, running around screaming. Verse 6. And when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you evil spirit." See, what was happening there is Jesus was confronting the demon that lived inside, or demons that lived inside this man. And I think it's always interesting to see how the demons throughout Scripture always recognized who Jesus was and always recognized that he had authority over them. And that's what's happening here. And he's saying, the demons are saying to Jesus, "Hey, don't torture us." And the story goes on, and they say, "Hey, just don't send us away from this place. Send us to this herd of pigs." And there's a herd of pigs over there. And Jesus gives permission for those evil spirits to leave the man and to go into the herd of the pigs. 2,000 pigs, they stampede and they go over the cliff. That got the attention of those who were watching the pigs. All right? And they went into the town and told the town, "Man, there's this guy out there. You know that guy that we cast out of the town? And that crazy guy, the one that screams and hollers and does all this stuff? This guy, Jesus, came and cast the demons out of him and destroyed all our pigs." I'm convinced they were more concerned about the pigs than they were the man. And the man's healed. And the people of the town said to Jesus, "Get out of here. We don't know how to handle this. Just leave us alone." And Jesus and disciples, they go to get back in the boat, and the man runs up to him and he says, "Hey, can I go with you?" Here's what happens in verse 19. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis, which is a gathering of 10 cities, Decapolis, how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed, because Jesus dared to care for one that everyone else avoided. A life was changed and his message was spread. The man lived in a graveyard waiting for death. Jesus goes to a graveyard and gives the man life. That's how Jesus loved. He also loved those he wasn't supposed to love. Luke chapter 7, typical scene. Jesus is talking to the people around him, and there's some Pharisees, some of the religious leaders there. They've been questioning him about the things they do and their disciples and the way they act and all of this stuff. And Jesus explains something about himself. In verse 34, he says, "The Son of Man came eating and drinking." He's talking about himself. "I came eating and drinking, and you say he is a glutton, a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." What's going on here? The Pharisees had looked at his life and said, "Who do you think you are? You're a teacher, you're a rabbi, you're a religious leader, and yet you hang out with tax collectors and these crazy sinners? What do you think you're doing? How can you be a man of God when you do that?" And Jesus seemed to love those he wasn't even supposed to love. Not to go and just join in their wild parties, but he went, later he says, because it's the sick who need a physician. It's being in a place to help those who need help. You know, and kind of getting off on a tangent here, but yeah, I think sometimes it's too easy to isolate ourselves from those that we need to be with. Now, this isn't a verse that's giving us permission to go out and do anything bad, dirty, dastardly thing we want to do. That's not what it's saying. Jesus went to these places so he can make a difference. But it's okay for you to be with people that aren't like you and maybe don't behave like you and things like you, as long as you're there and you hope to make a difference. In fact, it opens your eyes. And I think even helps your faith, ironically. I just give a personal example. There's two settings where I find myself in those settings. One is as I mentioned before, I play basketball at the Estelle Rec Center, 50 and older league. And when we go play basketball, it's not always like going to a Sunday school picnic, all right? There's guys that use bad language and they get mad and they scream and holler. And sometimes I feel like I'm on the playground again. I think, what in the world? I said, guys, this is not the NBA Finals, all right? We're doing good just to stand up, all right? But through that, over the years, I've developed some relationships. They have a banquet every year, and now they have me go to the banquet and offering a prayer for the meal at the beginning of that. I've had guys there come up and ask me to pray for their grandchildren or different situations. You never know how God can use you. As chaplain in the fire department, and the chief is back there, he could attest to this. It's not always like going to a Sunday school class to hang out in the stations there. But boy, it's great to rub elbows with these other guys, and it's given me opportunities to speak into their lives in different things, in different situations, to be the hands and feet and heart of Jesus. Jesus loved those he wasn't supposed to love. And that's how Jesus loved. Third thing, he loved those who didn't feel they fit in. You know anybody like that? In John chapter 4, we have a story here. Jesus and his disciples, they're going from Jerusalem. They're going north to Galilee, and the shortest way is due north. But most good Jews, they didn't do due north. Because you'd have to go through this area called Samaria, and Samaria was this dreaded area where these Jews that they felt had turned their back on their faith because they intermingled with the other peoples around them. And a good Jew would head east out of Jerusalem over to the Jordan River, up the East Bank. You've heard of the East Bank politically and many times in our culture. They'd go up the East Bank, and then when they got to Galilee, they'd head back west and go into Galilee. Jesus that day said, I'm going to cut right through Samaria. And I think he did it for a reason. Because about noon, they stopped at a well. And this is what happens. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? His disciples had gone into town to buy food, to look for the local McDonald's. That's not in there, but they're going to go buy food, all right? And the Samaritan woman said to him, you're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For the Jews do not associate with Samaritans. It's a parenthetical statement by John. And he's just simply stating the facts. No decent Jewish man would speak to a Samaritan woman. And Jesus approaches her, and they strike up this conversation. And the woman thinks he's wanting a drink of actual water, and Jesus basically says to her, oh, if you only knew, I have water that if you drink, you'll never thirst again. And she says, bring it on. I like that water. I won't have to come out here to the well anymore. And she says, no. It's deeper than that. And he shares with her, and she realizes that he knows who she is, really knows who she is. Because she came out that day to the well by herself because none of the other women in the town would hang with her. She didn't fit in. Her lifestyle was not what was comfortable to hang with. And yet he talked to her, and he cared for her, and he gave her living water that changed her life. And she ran back into town, and she began to tell everybody, this man. Well, listen to what happens in verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from the town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them. And he stayed for 2 days. Because of his words, many more became believers. And when the disciples came back, they saw a woman talking to Jesus, and they were appalled. What? He's talking to a Samaritan woman. They couldn't believe it. But Jesus talked to the woman and gave her everlasting life. That's the way Jesus loved. So an important question is this: what does it look like to love as Jesus did? That's an answer really we all have to answer on ourselves. There's a passage in Matthew 25 that is one of those passages that just kind of cuts to the heart at times. Matthew 25 verse 31, Jesus is talking here, and these are some of the last words Jesus spoke, because in Matthew 26 is when we have the Last Supper and the crucifixion and the resurrection, and all that stuff follows this last major section of teaching of Jesus. And his last parable he teaches is, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all his angels with him, he will sit down on his throne in heaven in glory. And all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty, or give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison, or go to visit you?" And the king will reply, "I tell you the truth. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you have done it unto me." How can you love like Jesus loved? I want to give some real life examples. I'm going to name names. I'm not trying to exalt these people, but I just want you to know that there's people you can connect with that maybe you're looking for a way to serve, to love like Jesus loved. Feed the hungry and thirsty. Well, how do you do that? Well, there's a lot of different ways. But about a year ago, we had a lady in the congregation came to me and said, "How can we get more involved in helping those in the community that are homeless and that need food and things like that?" And she now heads up a group that once a month preparing a meal to go to the Cafe of Life. And they put that food together and go over there and serve that. We prepare it here, take it over there once a month. But Cafe of Life is an organization here in Bonita that feeds 400 to 500 people a week, Monday through Fridays. And they're always looking for volunteers to help for that every day of the week. But Lee Friend is the one back there. And Lee, just raise your hand. Just from the standpoint, if you want to ask someone or connect with someone that's doing it, she can give you more information than I do, than I can. So thank you for that. That very practical way. Inviting a stranger into your home. Well, not too many of us are comfortable with doing that. But there are ways to be involved in the lives of others we don't know. Many of you know Justin Jamie, our youth minister, and his wife here at this church. And they work with our young people, and several months ago they started going through the process to be foster parents. And they went through all the classes and all the stuff that you have to go through to become a foster parent. And they went into that thinking that they would want to be a foster parent that helps out the other foster parents. They're looking for foster parents that will give the full-time foster parents relief. So if a foster parent wants to go on a vacation or they want a weekend off, then Jamie and Justin said, well, we'll take that child or children and give that person a break. And if you've seen a little guy running around with Justin and Jamie, he's one of those kids. They thought it was going to be for a weekend, and it's been 3 or 4 weeks now. But that's okay. He's loving the little guy, and the little guy's learning to love them. And they're building a relationship with the child's mom. And the goal of foster care is to get a child back into their home. And if you're interested in doing something like that or helping in that way, connect with Justin and Jamie. But when did I see you a stranger invite you in? That's a neat way that can happen. What about ministering to those in prison? That's a little tougher from the standpoint that you can't just go in and go down to the jail and say, "Excuse me, you got 2 or 3 prisoners I can visit with today?" It doesn't work that way. I've gone to prison, I've gone to jail to call on people and things like that I knew, and that's really the only way you can get in. There are prison ministries available, and I had a call this week from a lady who said, "We're doing one. If you're interested in that, get with me." And in fact, someone suggested after the last service, and I'll do this, I'm going to put all these things that I'm giving here down on a piece of paper and have them available next week. But got an email from someone this week that said, "Did you know there's a ministry where you can write letters online and give to Christians who are in jail around the world for their faith?" It's through Voice of Martyrs Ministry. If you go to the website prisonalert.com, prisonalert.com, and scroll down, you'll see there it says write letters. You click on that and you can write a letter. She found out about it. She was watching a TV show, and these ladies gave a testimony of how much it meant to them while they were in prison. They were getting these letters from these Christians around the world, and they eventually got released, and how much of an encouragement was to them. Helping the sick. How in the world did you do that? Well, it might be your neighbor. There's plenty of sick people around today with the flu is what I'm talking about, all right? Not your neighbor is, anyway. But there are volunteer organizations. Hope Hospice right around the corner, not more than a quarter of a mile from the church. Great organization that helps people in times of need. They need volunteers, and one of the examples is they need people to help feed the patients because they don't have enough nurses to go around and feed the patients. And if there's a patient there that can't feed themselves, so they have volunteers that go around and help feed the patients. We have a lady in our congregation, Sherry Barons, usually plays our ukulele up here. She can play the ukulele. She goes over there and plays the ukulele, goes from patient room to patient room and sings songs with them and things like that. You might connect with Sherry if you're interested in that. So those are some very practical things. I don't mention any of these people to lift them up as saints, but only to let you know that it can be done by anyone. To love as Jesus loved. And it's not our idea. It's His. In fact, He said this, "A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you." Let's pray.